The United Nations refuses to pay compensation to the families of victims of the 2010 Haitian cholera outbreak, blamed on its peacekeepers. You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rattansi. The outbreak of cholera brought devastation to a population already struggling to recover from the earthquake that killed more than 300,000 earlier that year. What's more, a range of studies, including an expert panel commissioned by the UN itself, have concluded that there is overwhelming evidence that the disease was brought to the country by United Nations peacekeeping troops who were meant to be helping the local population. Now, the families of those who died in the outbreak are having to deal with the UN's refusal to pay compensation for the thousands of deaths. Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor, James Bays, has more.
For more than 2 years, the UN has been investigating claims that its own peacekeepers started a cholera epidemic in Haiti that's killed almost 8,000 people and infected 1 in 16 Haitians. Most scientists who've examined the case believe the evidence is overwhelming. These Al Jazeera pictures show the camp where Nepalese soldiers were based and where it's believed sewage contaminated a river, starting the outbreak. The UN, though, has never admitted its peacekeepers are to blame, and it's never apologised. Now, in a bureaucratically worded statement, the UN says it won't pay compensation claims which amount to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Today, the United Nations advised the claimants' representatives that the claims are not receivable pursuant to Section 29 of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations.
We've come down to the Library of the United Nations to discover what that means. This is the resolution. The UN has never accepted responsibility for the cholera outbreak. What they're now saying is, even if it was our fault, we're not going to pay out any money. In fact, our peacekeepers are covered under this resolution by diplomatic immunity. Lawyers for the victims say it's disgraceful the way the UN has handled all this.
In many ways, the UN has already been found guilty in the court of public opinion. The evidence is there. It's essentially undisputed at this point that the UN is responsible. It's just a question of the UN actually living up to its obligations.
The UN Secretary General phoned the Haitian president before the statement was released. He knew this would be treated with anger and disbelief in Haiti, and it was.
This is revolting. The entire population, the family of the victims, will join forces to fight the UN mission. The UN statement is a declaration of war to the families of the victims and to everyone who is fighting to find compensation for them.
The UN brought the disease to the country. They can't say they won't compensate the victims. We have to send them home.
For Haitians, this was a bombshell announcement. Not only no admission of responsibility and no apology for all the deaths, but no compensation money either. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
The United Nations declined to take part in this discussion, but we are joined by Brian Concannon. He's the director of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. That's the organization that brought the claims of the cholera victims' families to the UN. In Durham, North Carolina, Laurent Dubois. He is professor of history at Duke University and author of Haiti, the Aftershocks of History. And in New York, Yves de Jour is the host of the weekly Haitian radio show Konbit Lakay. Brian Concannon, we want to spend a bit of time trying to understand this judgment because it does seem to raise a number of international implications beyond Haiti, perhaps. But first of all, do you feel that the UN observed due process in dealing with your complaint?
They clearly did not. They held the complaint for 15 months. The dismissal of it was basically one sentence that says that it's covered by Section 29 of the Convention. And that section actually is all about how the UN should, in fact, compensate people who are harmed. They don't explain why our claim doesn't fit into that section. And we have some of our speculations about how that could be. And it really isn't something that would hold water if it was put up to any kind of serious judicial review. But what the UN is doing, as they've done all along since they decided to pump the contaminated waste into Haiti's rivers, is they've relied on the fact that they will not be brought before a court, and so that they don't have to seriously answer any of these allegations.
All right, well, let's look at this judgment. And as you say, they say the claims are not receivable pursuant to Section 29 of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. And this is what that section actually says. The United Nations shall make provisions for appropriate modes of settlement of A, disputes arising out of contracts or other disputes of a private law character to which the United Nations is a party, and B, disputes involving any official of the United Nations who by reason of his official position enjoys immunity, if immunity has not been waived by the Secretary General. And Brian Concannon, as you suggest, that suggests the UN is liable then to be held accountable. Or is it something to do with the difference between public and private law? I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think if the UN were inclined to send a representative to your show and they were inclined to answer your question, they would say this is a public law matter, not a private law matter. And that distinction is between things are regular, a private law is a regular tort claim, a car accident, something like that, and a public law is something that involves the UN's policies, like the decision to deploy troops or not to deploy troops. It's troubling that the UN puts our claims in the box of public and policy issues rather than private, more akin to a car accident, because what we're saying is that the UN put contaminated water into Haiti's river system. And if that's a matter of policy, that's troubling for the UN. But also, if you can put our claim into the box of things that are not subject to a claim, then virtually anything can be, even a car accident. You can say, oh, that's about the policies, that involves policies of UN training and supervision of drivers. And so what they're really doing is creating an exception that completely swallows the rule, and the rule is that people harmed by UN operations are entitled to compensation. And
just to be clear, I mean, you are representing private individual claimants. You're not representing the Haitian government.
Exactly. The Haitian government is not involved in this. We're private lawyers. We're representing private people who are not alleging a policy problem with the UN. They're alleging a problem of the UN contaminating their water, which is just as routine a tort action as, as is a car accident, as is an assault, any of the types of things that courts all over the world, including the UN Claims Department, process on a routine basis. And the only way of really distinguishing our claim from some of those claims that are always processed routinely is the fact that this is a very big claim, that we have 5,000 people we filed for, and there's another 500,000 or more people who could file if
right.
the
Well, I mean,
UN was open to these claims.
That is the argument then. Is it because this could destroy the UN? It could be just too costly, or is it actually because of other precedents that this case might set, which might curtail its activities?
Yeah, I think they're worried about the cost. I think they're worried about the precedent. But having a precedent that the UN needs to be responsible to vulnerable people in the countries where it operates, I actually think that's a good precedent. I don't think it's all bad that the UN would then cause less harm to people that are the subjects of its peacekeeping mission. In terms of the cost, the UN does continue to talk about the cost, but this is an organization that is spending over $500 million a year in a peacekeeping mission in a country that has not had a recognized war in any of our lifetimes. And so 1 in 10 peacekeepers are in Haiti, spending a lot of money. Military missions are extremely expensive, and our clients think that it would be much better use of the taxpayer dollars of the U.S. and other countries that are paying into the UN mission to put that money into saving lives, drilling wells, putting in sanitation systems, rather than into troops in a place where they're demonstrably not needed.
And I want to bring in Professor Dubois and Yves Jour into this discussion in a moment, but very quickly, Brian, just to be clear, the UN is claiming immunity as well from local jurisdiction as part of its status of forces agreement there, which does require some sort of claims commission to be set up, but that hasn't actually been set up either. Is that correct?
The UN has never set up a claims commission in 60 years of peacekeeping. But we felt, because of that status of forces agreement, we felt we needed to do this in 2 steps, that we needed to give the UN a chance to set up a mechanism, either a claims commission or another mechanism, to resolve this dispute. And once they refused, which they've done, then we can go into a national court and tell the national court that the UN has no right to invoke the immunity because it's not upholding its end of the bargain, which is an obligation to provide an alternate mechanism for resolving.
And that's what you plan to do now?
So the UN. Yes, the UN has closed the door in the sense that it's not going to give, willingly, it's not going to give our clients justice, but it opened a door because it opened the door to a national court where we can now go in and say the UN has forfeited its right to invoke immunity.
And when is this going to happen? How do things proceed from here?
You know, we don't have a timeline. How it proceeds is we've been researching these issues. We haven't finished the research. We're looking at courts in the U.S., in Haiti, and in Europe, and there's advantages and disadvantages to all those places. As soon as we finish our research, we'll make a decision, and we've got, we're working on the complaint, and those should be filed as soon as we can get that together.
And very quickly, last question to you, in this section of the discussion, has anyone been held to account for the UN's negligence in bringing cholera to Haiti, as far as you know, Brian Concannon?
As far as I know, no. And even some of the simplest things, the UN's own report that you mentioned earlier in the show made a recommendation that they should at least improve the testing protocols so that people coming from an area where a disease like cholera is epidemic should be tested or treated before they're sent to a place where that epidemic could cause a lot of harm. Even that very simple change has not been made. And now we're 2.25 years after the epidemic, and so far as anybody can tell, there's been no lessons learned from that on the part of the United Nations.
Jean-Yves, point de jour, I take it this doesn't come as a surprise to you necessarily. I know you came on in December and suggested this is how things were going to pan out. But can you at least see now, though, that the way is open to take this to other channels, to civilian trials, basically, make it a civic matter?
Yes, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to Brian and I'm laughing because I told you in December that it was a joke. And besides, that decision that the UN has put out, it's the United States decision. It's not, UN is acting as a proxy for the United States, France, and Canada. To some extent, it's the United States who decides. And the other thing is, long time ago, we are behind 15 months ago. When I said 15 months ago, I remember fully well that the Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network, that's what they were talking. That we have to take the UN to a real court, and we have to try them in a real court. But
that's what Brian Concannon said that they're trying to do, but this was a stage that had to be got through in order to get to that stage.
That was a joke to begin with. That was a waste of time. We said it a long time ago. And they started doing it a long time ago, that they started doing the work. And I think that what's her name was, Margaret Laurent was working with Ira Cosburn on the case long before Brian Concannon was involved. And see, this is what I've been talking about a long time ago. Because we have to teach those people a lesson, and the only lesson that they will know is go through a real court system. How can you go to the UN while you have, for example, Paul Farmer and all those guys working for the UN? And another thing that I would like to mention is the fact that the UN is claiming immunity. Let me tell you something. The SOFA agreement, that the sign that led them inside Haiti is illegal. Is illegal because it was signed by a former UN employee, and it was a de facto government. So the whole UN operations in Haiti, we can also question the legality of that operations in Haiti. So all the way, any way you turn it, if we go to a proper court, proper judicial system, I think we can hold the UN accountable for what they have done and for what they continue to do in Haiti.
Brian Concannon, very quickly, do you want to respond to that?
Just quickly, I mean, I agree with the problems of going with the UN. We haven't found, we've done a lot of research, we've got some of the top human rights lawyers in the world working on this case. We could not find a way of getting into a US or other court without first giving the UN the opportunity to deny our claim. And I haven't heard anybody else give us that kind of a roadmap. And so I think this is, it is a long process, and people are dying. 1,000 people have died in the last year from cholera, and it's regrettable that we had to go through that process. But I haven't seen anybody who came up with a way of taking a shortcut there.
Professor Dubois, in many ways, this all does seem to fit pretty neatly in with the history of UN operations in Haiti. Certainly the sense of impunity and unaccountability, this lack of transparency. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, and actually it's a bit mystifying in many ways and very troubling that they didn't just get out in front of this to begin with. I mean, it would have made a big difference to just identify the source and kind of admit that early on. It would have made a big difference in terms of containing the epidemic. So now it's puzzling, but in some ways it does fit into a bigger pattern. I think it also just raises a much larger issue, which is that the MINUSTA mission is now in its 9th year. There was an earlier military mobilization starting in 1994. As Brian said, it's a military-style mission of the kind that you would normally send to a country in a civil war. There has been no war in Haiti. And so you just have a kind of set of questions that this crystallizes for Haitians, a kind of sense of wondering, what is this mission about? Why is it there? Why is it continuing? And more broadly, about the kind of the problematic ways and the difficulty of getting a kind of responsiveness and transparency from international organizations in Haiti. So it does point to much bigger questions.
Right, but as a historian,
it's just a really potent symbol.
As a historian of Haiti, why were they sent there? Why are they still there?
Well, they're sent in 2004 after the overthrow and coup against Aristide, but it's in line actually with some earlier military missions that started in 1994 when Clinton sent the U.S. in to reinstall Aristide. So you have about a 20-year process of military presence of different kinds. The problem is that, as with so much else in aid in Haiti, what's happened essentially is that there's been very little effort, or not enough effort, to sort of strengthen the institutions within Haiti themselves, the state institutions, and a kind of continual cycle of these foreign groups taking charge of all kinds of things. So in some ways, the lack of transparency about cholera does fit into that pattern. And what they've done a little bit, and this is troubling as well, is they've kind of turned it back and essentially in some ways blamed the Haitians, right? They've said, well, it may have come from this base, but it's other causes or other things have also made it spread, the lack of water and so forth.
Right.
So again, you do have a kind of
And the
lack
water
of
infrastructure's actually got
accountability.
worse since the UN, over the last few years under the UN mandate.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, in some ways, I think it's also just a question of, again, as Yves was saying, just the kind of, and Brian both, where the money is going, right? So why is the money being spent on this very strong military presence when there's all kinds of other ways that it could be spent? And that, again, also encapsulates a little bit of what's happened with the whole reconstruction process, where there's a real disjuncture between a lot of Haitian priorities and the way that money's been spent. So,
what about the
really is a troubling situation.
What about the argument that Yves actually mentioned in December when he came on, that actually, frankly, this is just basically the U.S. outsourcing its occupation force for Haiti, and as a result, it's no surprise that the UN quashes any questioning of their presence or indeed their conduct while they're deployed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
very quickly, Professor Dubois, and then Yves.
Yes.
Well, no, I mean, certainly the U.S. is obviously the most powerful, they're the most powerful force, foreign force, I mean, in terms of political power and economic power in Haiti. I think that at the same time, you have a lot of confusion about exactly what the mission and the goals are here. And all of this, I mean, deserves a really strong airing and debate that hasn't really happened yet.
Well, they never come on, for a start. But Yves, you were about to say.
Yes, what I was about to say, what I was about to add to what the professor just said is the fact that it is a strategy on the part of the United States to weaken the institutions in Haiti. Remember, first they started investing in the NGOs, that is the non-governmental organizations. And then when they said we were building institutions in Haiti, actually they were destroying the institutions in Haiti because they don't want strong institutions in the country, because they want institutions that they can control. And this is why you have all the way up to the electoral process, to the parliament, to the judiciary, where you have, for example, a demagogue being selected as the current president of Haiti. And it's part of a whole plan for Haiti. And then to blame it on Haitians themselves. And this is the strategy that they're doing. You have a proxy army, you have a country where you weaken the institutions so you can justify your presence and then continue to do what you want to do with the country.
Right,
this is part of a plan, of a strategy for Haiti.
Well, then let's bring in the other major development in Haiti this week, which in some ways is connected to many of the themes we've already been discussing, perhaps. Former dictator Jean-Claude Duvalier defied a court order to attend a hearing on Thursday. Haiti's Court of Appeal is determining whether Duvalier, known as Baby Doc, should face charges for human rights abuses during his rule. He's now required to appear in court next Thursday. Duvalier was named president for life when he was only 19 in 1971, after the death of his father, Francois, known as Papa Doc. Human rights groups say that Duvalier used the paramilitary group, the Tonton Macoute, to torture opponents and kill some 30,000 people during their combined 29-year rule. During Baby Doc's 15 years in power, hundreds of political prisoners were allegedly tortured or disappeared in prisons collectively known as the Triangle of Death. But a lower court judge ruled last year that Duvalier should be tried only on allegations of embezzling millions of dollars of government assets. The judge concluded that the statute of limitations on other charges had expired. But survivors and rights groups argue that there's no statute of limitations when it comes to crimes against humanity, and indeed Haiti is bound by its various international legal obligations as signatories of various documents. At the very least, Yves, does that give you some hope that this trial does seem to be continuing and taking place, and there's pressure on Duvalier to appear at court next week?
First of all, you have a neo-Duvalierist regime in Haiti. How can you have justice in a justice system that is being controlled by the Duvalierists? So that the whole thing.
And yet he is being required to appear at court. That the appeal process does seem to be.
Yes, they have been under pressure by the international community to make a fuss, to do something, you know. And this is why you see Amnesty International, you see all the others, they put out statement calling for the Haitian government to act on Duvalier. Remember, they only react to international pressure. But it is a joke. Don't expect much from even when Duvalier appeared in court. You can put money in the bank on that statement.
Brian Concannon, actually, I mean, it's interesting because we talk about international pressure. It was many's understanding that actually there was a lot of international pressure not to prosecute him, specifically from the Obama administration. But what's your thought?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that Jean-Claude Duvalier was sheltered by France for 25 years without any real effort to prosecute him. And he was returned with the full knowledge of France and the United States in 2011. And when he came back, the Haitian government in power then immediately prosecuted him and had the position that there was no statute of limitations for his political violence charges. It was only after there was a new president who was installed in May of 2011 that a new prosecutor was named, and it was actually a prosecutor who recommended that all of the charges be dropped. And the judge was really just agreeing with the prosecutor, saying, okay, I agree with this recommendation that these charges be dropped. And this is in the context of a justice system where there's been very serious and repeated efforts by the executive branch to influence the justice system. And so I think we in terms of the international aspect to it, the human rights groups, the UN High Commission for Human Rights, and almost anybody who's involved in human rights as their main objective has said clearly that this case needs to be prosecuted.
What about the Obama administration?
That's an international law obligation. Well, that's the other thing. So the human rights groups all say yes, prosecute. The countries and MINUSTA have not said anything, or they refuse to say that he should be prosecuted, which most people in Haiti, I think very rightly, take as the U.S. does not want to do that. And I think it's a combination of wanting to be nice to the friend. I mean, the U.S. government considers the current administration in Haiti a friend, and they don't want to put any pressure on the friend. But there's also a long history of U.S. support for the Duvalier regime.
Professor Dubois, we've only got a minute left.
That could be dredged up.
Could you give us a minute potted history of how the U.S. not only supported him but helped spirit him away when he was overthrown?
Well, certainly. I mean, the U.S. support for both Francois and Jean-Claude Duvalier was quite clear and is well documented. And I think that's part of the issue, that this brings up a lot of bigger questions about U.S. responsibility. I do think it's one of the most important things that can happen is for both the U.S. and the Haiti to really reckon with what happened during the Duvalier years, what the legacies of that period are, because much of what we're seeing today are legacies of that. You know, it's been left essentially to it's artists, writers, and artists have been confronting this legacy, but the political space and the civil society hasn't really openly, and it would be very, very important for them to do so. Unfortunately, it's hard to see how that's going to happen.
Yves, we've only got 20 seconds. What happens if Duvalier doesn't turn up at court next week once again?
I don't expect much out of it, because the bigger picture is the fact that they want to run in the political elections, in the elections that are coming up. So they want, Martelly is trying to find a way to get that Duvalier thing behind himself. That's the big issue right now.
Jean-Yves Point du Jour, thank you very much. Professor Laurent Dubois, thank you. Brian Concannon, thank you very much. And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at InsideStory@aljazeera.net.